You're listening to Brainwork Framework, a business and marketing podcast, brought to you by focus-biz.com.
This week's special guest is Sharon Rolph. She is the CEO of Effortless Vitality. She teaches newly retired singles to sparkle without torturing your friends and family. We've already had a great conversation before we even hit the record button here. So excited to have her on. Sharon, thank you for joining us. How are you today?
Well, thank you for having me. Life has its hurdles and puddles, and life has been that way the last couple of weeks, but talking to great people, podcasts are getting better and better, and that seems to me that life is going in the right direction.
That is fantastic. So excited to hear more about your journey. We all have these challenges, the wins, just the up and down feeling. But tell us more about your journey. What were you doing before kind of led you into what you're doing today?
Well, I'm the middle of five, grew up on a farm stacking hay and milking cows, and actually when I worked for the post office for 3 years, hey, stacking hay came in handy. I had strength in my shoulders, and it paid off. The toting those trays of mail was heavier than it looked. I have been always interested in people's potential. When I was about 14, 15 years old, I was like, what's my potential? And it has followed me all through life. So when it comes to being in retirement, and I do brag about being 76 soon, a birthday next month. So I find all this free time in retirement as being untapped potential. Time freedom is full of potential if we address it with the right mindset and be willing to be our boss of our time and schedule, be our boss of living from our heart. Not many employers pay you to live from your heart and do work for them. But now you get to, because it's all your choice of what you do. Are you still a lifelong learner? All that education you gathered over your years, all your experiences, that's a gold mine for now engineering yourself into a purpose. Purpose is the secret glue to retirement. And living with purpose in retirement gives you better health, longevity, and meaning. Who doesn't want that? And volunteering is one of the best ways to tip your feet into a new purpose, because it volunteering has lots of opportunities and it gets you going quickly. But we'll probably talk more about that. But longevity, better health, and meaning and loving yourself while you're doing it. It feels good.
And who doesn't want all of those things, especially finding your purpose? And honestly, I don't think this problem just affects newly retired people. I think everybody deals with feeling invisible or having the courage or what potential or purpose we need. All of those things you help and you address others to feel. That's exciting. And this is what people need. They need that confidence. They need that courage. They need to find that purpose. How do you think people kind of find their life's purpose when they're newly retired? What things can they do? You mentioned volunteering. What other ways can they give back and find that purpose?
Well, a lot of people, actually, I think there's probably 80% of, I don't know that it's that high, actually. There's at least 20% of people who never married and are retired. And there's probably more like 37, 40% of people that are married, but they don't have any kids. So different. When you don't have grandkids pulling on your shirt, come to my birthday party, come to my games, come to my recital. That's all fun. You are so responsible for your social life in retirement, and especially when you don't have kids, and even more special when you aren't living with a mate or have a good circle of social connections. So the other things to do in retirement that is a good use of your time is creating something for your legacy. What our legacy could be: your values, maybe writing a book or sharing them in what life has taught you. It could be things that you've created, I think my dad created a grandfather clock. He was a carpenter, and so he ordered a kit. He didn't come by making it all himself, but that whole finishing and putting all the things together. And that could be teaching, mentoring others. I did a podcast of about 50 of them, and one of my guests was somebody who was a mentor to Boys and Girls Club. And the feeling he shared about seeing his kids that he had mentored at first, second, third grade, especially to read and math, to see them walking across the stage at their graduation from high school was just priceless. He was teaching the next generation, and I don't know how many people he did that with, but can you imagine that feeling of pride of the contribution that something like that could be?
Absolutely. And a legacy is something that not many people think about until maybe often later in their life, or even not at all. I think if we focus more on what we're leaving behind, what we're giving, the world would be a much better place. Corporations would follow the rules and give back and actually provide more value instead of just taking and taking.
Yeah. Another man had worked in civil engineering that was my guest. And when he retired, he looked around his community and looked for projects that he could recognize could be improved. So he gave me some examples. There's actually a document by World Health Organization on age-friendly cities. And so, well, some of those characteristics of age-friendly city, and I think my community here is working on it, but do you have lots of walkable, safe areas for people to just walk around town? My city happens to be a cultural district, creative district for the state, but he made a list of buildings that had elevators in them. If you wanted to see a lawyer and you were in a wheelchair, buildings that had elevators were kind of important to those kind of people. I don't remember other situations like walking dog parks or perhaps, but that gentleman has now passed on. When I wrote my book, Fresh Courage in Retirement, Finding Purpose, Essence, and Fulfillment, I got in touch with the email that asking him for permission to share his story, and his wife responded and said that he had passed on. So what a honor it was to leave his story in my book. But I also wrote a list of 8 ideas in this little kind of an ebook, but I do charge for it because the quality ideas I'm giving you it was what makes your heart sing. So maybe it's just a simple thing like decorating, keeping the roundabouts in your area trimmed and beautiful. Beauty. And to see weeds growing in a public place like that is just sad to me. But you could take on something that's really close, really handy, and put your heart into it. Or you might want something more challenging, like following the monarch butterfly migration. Or if you like to travel, touching the water in the 7 oceans. Thinking outside the box is one of the things I love to help people with. And when something tugs at your heart, isn't that the best feeling? And I want to help you think about being curious and courageous in retirement with a potential and living from a spark that's inside.
That is wonderful. You found your passion and your purpose, and you're helping to serve the community. And nothing wrong with having a small fee associated with some of the courses or ebooks that you put out there, because it's the extreme value that you give to people. That exchange is what drives business. That's the capitalistic model. Nothing wrong with that, but you provide a ton of free value and offers from some of your other landing pages here. There's like a 5 module course and a workbook. You have a community to bring people together. This is just the way that you can put your passion out there to help people.
Yeah. My latest is in the process of getting approved for being on the Great Discovery platform. It's called Discover Your Spark, Rekindle Your Joy. And I've been focused a fair amount the last 3, 4 years on the phrase heaven on earth. I love collecting near death experience stories. And I found that they often bring back a pretty similar message. And they also tell about the beauty, the fragrance, the color, the music. And so I'm kind of weird in that I imagine standing in all that beauty, color, fragrance, and music and wanting it to permeate every cell of my being, and then saying, I wonder how that would change here. earth where I am now. And what it changes is wanting to bring it to you. But here's discover your spark, rekindle your joy was the first thing I learned in my coaching school. And they called it essence, but lots of people are using the word essence lately. But here's mine and see if you can't identify with the beauty of it. I am precious jewel of wisdom. I am colorful collaborator, motivator, and learner. I am tranquil, authentic, and pure inspirer. I light fires. I want to light your fire with your potential and to reach your retirement for meaning and fulfillment.
I absolutely love that. It's your passion and purpose. It's what gets you excited during the day. Earlier, when we were talking more about some of the marketing strategies, not only are you bringing the free value through these courses and the ebook, but you've started some webinars. You're doing some outreach, making connections and building relationships, and that is so important within business and how we're kind of presenting ourselves online. You're doing a fantastic job with everything you're doing, from the branding to the messaging. You are really finding that traction right now. So many entrepreneurs, we're kind of getting that, struggling to get that start, to get going. But once we find that, it is just full steam ahead, ups and downs through life and entrepreneurship.
Well, in fact, Chris, you mentioned the volunteering program. I do a little preaching in there. I remember my mom telling me that when you make somebody do a blessing for somebody else, you get blessed too. And that actually happened last month. I drive for the food bank here in Edmonds, and I've been delivering food, groceries for 4 or 5 families for a couple years now. And last month, my one of my stops says I commented on she's got a lavender plant right next to the front door, and I like to rub my hands over her lavender plant. And she started pointing and kind of stumbling over her words. And I thought, well, she's probably pointing me to some more flowers. No, she was pointing me to 2 trees. They were either plum or prune trees, but they were overloaded with fresh fruit. And she insisted I take some home. Well, that's the rule of reciprocity. I help her and she helps me. It was just kind of around the circle. It comes back to you. But I bring out some points like you don't know who's watching you, who's coming behind you, that you're a living testimony to a life well lived. That is so powerful. And when we used to eat dinner around the dining table, we would share stories like that, or would get sermons, or what would be the point of the day that mom and dad want to teach you. You need to learn a lesson here. What that reciprocity and giving back and helping our neighbor are lessons that we don't pass on around the dinner table that much anymore.
I can definitely tell you that I've noticed others being very generous, and myself, when I'm generous, I think it has a positive influence on people. If we continue to kind of live life in this way of just continuous give back, reciprocity will come and be plentiful for us as well.
Yeah, I really want to expand on that volunteering course because I had a guest on my podcast probably 4 years ago that had been the AARP president for Washington State for 6 years. And so he came on my program with 9 tips laid out very succinctly, the lessons that volunteering brings you. And so I built on what he had shared on my podcast and then added my own comments and a couple sidebars. And the last lesson he shared was he somehow got trained to go into senior living places and check to see if all their needs were getting met. And he found this lady that didn't have any teeth. So she wasn't going to the lunchroom to have meals with others. She was too embarrassed and humble, probably, to do that. So he was able to just make a couple connections for her to go get dental dentures so she could then eat in the cafeteria. And he felt like he had changed her life immeasurably just by doing a couple can do phone calls or connections to get this need met. And the fact that you're changing people's lives is just one example of what volunteering can do for you. I know one of my uncles, he spent his whole retirement volunteering in various ways. So, what a good feeling to help take care of each other.
Yes, absolutely. And it's one thing to get back just because it feels like you have to, but to want to. That simple change, that simple action can have a profound effect on someone else's life. So for you to take the 5, 10, 30 minutes to an hour, it could take giving to someone what it means to them.
Well, and there's such a need. While I wrote my book, I used the Ken Dykewell's book, What Retirees Want. In the back of several of the chapters, he mentions where there is room for growth, for new services, new products. He talked often about how people in retirement, they're looking for doing something intergenerational with meaning and to travel in the process of doing it. And I guess there's a new term for that. I'm not recalling what that is, but it's a different kind of leisure generational travel. But my favorite story was a gal that wrote the book Smiling at the World, Joyce Meyer. And she had felt like she needed to expand her heart. And she worked for a couple of years on creating an itinerary to volunteer around the world for a year. And she wound up feeding baby lions, being in a baboon sanctuary, and one of the baboons at their pond that they go to every day had come down and put his arm around her shoulder that scared her. And yet it was an action caring from the animal to her. She's, she sang Imagine by the Beatles to a college class in China to help them practice their English. It was just such a awesome to have her as a guest, feeling like stretching outside the box and stretching your heart because now she has friends and probably family feeling around the world.
Is incredible. Sharon, now where can more people connect with you and find you online, take advantage of your offers and just connect with you?
Well, I do have a website called SharonRolph.com, ROLPH. I do have on Instagram Sharon underscore Queen of Courage. And I've got lots of things out there. And I started by talking about these little art blocks that I make and what the words of wisdom mean to me. And I'm holding up one that says, worry is a misuse of imagination. Our ingenuity wasn't meant to ruminate on fear. It's ruminate on create ingenuity. Here's another one. Have you forgotten who you are? Oh, yeah. In retirement, you still got all that education. You still have all those colleagues that you've met over your years. This is a line from The Lion King. You are still that dynamite trombone player that you were in high school or the poet writer that you were in college. And still, just because you don't have a business card and a structure to your day that your job created for you now need to fill your time in a meaningful way that both makes your heart sing and makes the world a better place. Create a little bit of heaven on earth.
I love that, Sharon. You're obviously doing good work. Your heart is in the right place. You have found what gives you your purpose. Would there be any advice you would give to your younger self, 10 years ago, maybe when you were 45 or something?
Well, I like to end my podcast with this line from Thomas Wolfe, I believe it is. And I did see it on the wall at work one day. And it's a message to couldn't tell you that I had the courage to walk this path myself as much as I'd like to, but it goes like this. If one has a talent and fails to use it, one has failed. If one has a talent and partially uses it, they have partially failed. If one has a talent and finds somehow to use the whole of it, they have gloriously succeeded and won a satisfaction that few people ever know.
Sharon, that is beautiful. A lot of words of wisdom here. We appreciate the tips and advice. For all of you listening, we'll have links available down in the show notes and the description so you can get connected with Sharon Rolph here. Sharon, we appreciate all of your time and sharing your words of wisdom with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris. This has been wonderful.
Absolutely.
It's an honor.
Thank you. Thank you so much.